So we're going to hear from each of these very, very prestigious leaders who, again, wear a lot of hats like everybody else in this room. Tiffany has recently published a book called Drop the Ball. She has been part of many other organizations, which I'll let you talk about as we get into this conversation. And I'm actually going to have a first question for you. So Tiffany's book, if people haven't had a chance to read it, talks about shifting norms. And that's what we're going to talk about on this panel. What does it look like to be changing culture and also workplace? And those blend into each other. And when we're talking about culture, again, we mean the social norms, the norms that tell us, men and women, what we should be and how we should act. So how are those being shifted? And one thing that I really liked when we had our conversation, as I understood it, was that your book in some ways is about imperfection. The need, or the ability to stop being perfect, which is one of those norms, I think, for a lot of women especially, of how to be perfect everywhere, working and being a mom, if you are one, and running your household, and how to do all these things at once. So would you tell us a little bit about that, Tiffany, what that means to take on that norm and shift it?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Well, first of all, I'm just filled with an enormous gratitude right now. I see a number of people in the room who have invested in me throughout my career and have made it possible for me to be here. I feel like it's a homecoming because I was raised by feminists. Marie Wilson, who many of you know, is my political mother. But I've spent the past few years serving as an executive at a technology company and doing a bunch of other things. And so I just feel such enormous gratitude for many of you who are in the room. I wrote this book, Drop the Ball, because I was someone like many of you who was very focused on the collective solutions to women's leadership. I was on the launch team for Lean In. I spent most of my time talking about things like equal pay for equal work, affordable childcare, which I understand we don't necessarily want to use in some states, talking about and working with Fortune 500 companies on workplace flexibility, basically creating cultures where everyone can bring their full selves to the table and thrive. But in 2013, I had this experience over and over where I would go and I would speak. I do a lot of public speaking to large groups of women. And I started to make this observation that whenever I stopped talking and I opened up the conversation for the Q&A, that I would always get initially personal questions that to me had nothing to do with what I was talking about. And you all get these questions, someone would raise her hand and she would basically say, yes, Tiffany, I heard what you were saying, but my question is, I know you have 2 school-age kids and your husband, he's in Dubai, and you're with us in San Francisco right now, but you live in Harlem and you're gonna be in Baltimore tomorrow, and I like your dress and I like your shoes, and you seem happy and healthy. And I read your bio and it looks all impressive, and even look, you have time to go to the gym, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, what the hell, how are you doing all of this? How do you manage it all? And I have to be honest with you and tell you that for a long time I kind of dismissed that question because I thought it wasn't a very substantive question that we should be dealing with, and I was a little annoyed that men never got that question, right? But Marie taught me, and for those of you who don't know Marie, she'll be invoked a few times today. She used to always say when I was being raised by her, Tiffany, if you want to make real change in the world, you're going to have to learn how to meet people where they are. You can't always expect people to come to where you are. And I realized that I was expecting people to come to where I was because all I cared about was getting more women into leadership, but that women were saying to me, Tiffany, we get you want us to be a senator. We get that you want us to run for office. We get that you want us to get to the top of our companies. But like this morning, I was just trying to figure out, like, how do I get out of the house with everyone with the right backpack, and the right lunch? Can you help me with that? And so Drop the Ball was really my response to this question of how do you manage it all and how do you do it all? And it was an important book, but a scary book for me to write, because in doing so, I was going to have to reveal my dirty feminist secret, okay? Which was that publicly, I was consistently advocating for the disruption of gender stereotypes and norms in our society in order for us to move everyone forward. But at home, I didn't really disrupt any gender stereotypes. In fact, at home, I was pretty much on Stepford Wife autopilot. And my Stepford Wife autopilot was made even more complicated by the fact that I had a very bad case of what I call HCD, which is home-controlled disease. This is basically when you feel like everything under your roof should be done a certain way, which is your way, and it manifests in all kinds of things like, keeping a running track of the leftovers in the refrigerator, or making sure all of the towels were folded a certain way. And I had to really come to a place in my own leadership journey where I had to swallow the pill that as a diversity and inclusion practitioner, I was not doing a very good job of really harnessing the innovation and the creativity and the talent of people in my own home, particularly the man that was in my home. And so Drop the Ball is really a tribute to men, and it's a book about what can happen when we engage all of us in creating a better world for everyone. So that's a little bit about imperfection, but mostly about why I wrote the book and why I'm really excited to be here.
Okay, we're going to get back to you a little bit later. Does anybody, what did you call it? HCD?
Home control disease. No one knows what I'm talking about.
Oh my God, it has a name. Sorry.
Why asking reload the dishwasher?
Okay, but we're just going to get real in this room because this is what we do when we come together. We create an intimate space. We can feel safe to have these conversations and admit all of these things. So actually, I want to move to you, Michael, because Tiffany, you said this is about meeting people where they are and talking to them in the way that they can, I think, best hear it. And so, Michael, when you and I spoke on the phone, you shared with me a little bit about some of the work you do. Michael works with many corporations, both in the US and in Europe, to talk about gender and gender norms. And so share, if you would, a little bit about how you have those conversations. You're meeting them where they are. These might be people who don't want to come and listen to you have this conversation. So how do you open it up and make it an inviting space?
Well, it's a very, very good question. Before I do, I have to say what I hear from men around exactly home-controlled disease. Because I cannot tell you how many times I have been in companies talking to men, and the men say, look, my wife keeps, she'll walk into the living room, and I'm there watching a ball game. She says, you never vacuum the living room. You never clean up. So I got the vacuum. I vacuumed the living room. I sat back down. She walks back in, and she says, you call that clean? She gets the vacuum, and she does it again. So I said, well, why bother? And I thought, okay, well, let's just say, for sake of argument, that she's the home cleaning supervisor. You're an employee. And let's take that analogy for a minute. Let's say I'm your supervisor, and I say, I want that report by Friday. And you give me the report on Friday, and I say, you call that a report? Would you then say, okay, I'll never write a report again? No. You would say, help me write it better. Right? So I think it is disingenuous of a large number of men to sort of give themselves the individual opt-out option because they tried it once and got critiqued by HCD people. So having said that, let me say, here's what I'm hearing now, and I think we're all aware of this. This is a really important moment, it seems to me. The Me Too moment, I think, is really a game changer. So here's what I'm hearing from men. Tell me if this doesn't sound familiar to you. They say, I don't know what to say anymore. I don't want to offend women. I don't know what to say. And then they go up to women, tell me what to say. Tell me what to say and I'll say it. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Right? This is the most common phrase I have heard. So common, in fact, that it is now like a mantra that men just say it without even having really thought it through. So here's my response to them about this, because I think this is really good news for us. If I hear these men saying, I don't want to offend anybody, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, the first thing I hear is, we don't want to be jerks. That is a good starting place. We don't want to be a jerk. Here's the second thing. Yes, you're uncomfortable in the workplace. You don't know what's okay to say. Women have been uncomfortable for 2 millennia. You've been uncomfortable for 2 months. Sit with it. This is a good thing. This is you will learn a lot being uncomfortable. But the third thing, and I think this is the most important thing, is I think it puts some pressure on us, because in the way that I just described it, what did you hear me say? I said, the men say, tell us what to say. It's back on you. You tell us what to do. I think that's a mistake. What I try to work with men, is very simple. I think it is time for men to, A, listen to Oprah. At the Golden Globes, Oprah said, STFU, listen to the women. That's principle one. Shut up, listen to the women. Number two, start talking to other men. We have to learn how to support each other and to challenge each other. We can't do that challenging alone. That's why we need to support each other. We need to be able to do that. And we'll come back to some workplace sort of policy changes, like, for example, parental leave, which sadly is one of 4 countries in the world that offers no paid parental leave to anyone. But there's some really good information about this that I think we can talk about. So what I try to say to men is very simple. We should support gender equality because it's the right thing to do, period, full stop. We know that. But it's also interesting to know that gender equality is good for companies. It increases bottom line, profitability, return on investment, reputation, lowers labor costs, increases job satisfaction. Every single measure you could find has a good correlation between gender equality and positive outcomes. So it's good for business. And the most important thing is all of the available data shows that gender equality is actually good for men. It improves our relationships with our friends, with our partners, with our children. Gloria Steinem never tires of saying it increases longevity. You live longer, the more gender equal your relationship, the longer you live. It enhances our sex life. It is a win-win. So what I want to show men is this is not a zero-sum game. The pie gets bigger, and therefore supporting gender equality is not only the right thing to do, and that should be enough, but it's also in your interest as a man. You are a stakeholder in this struggle.
So I'm sure the conversations get really interesting, as you're mentioning, Michael, because right now everybody's hearing about Me Too, Time's Up. These are major campaigns. Many of us in this room feel like, yes, it's about time. We've been working at it for, as I say, years, if not decades. And if you look at what's happening in common with those and other movements, it's that it is about giving a voice to women specifically to talk about things that they have experienced. And so, Norma, I want to turn to you because this has been some of your work that you've done. And so Norma, who's been a designer for a very long time, 50 years, 50, we're now, you can imagine, and at some point we'll talk about like kind of, a male-dominated industry, I think. But you created a space and a site called Stop Objectification, which is another place where women were sharing stories. And this was starting 6 or 7 years ago. So tell us a little bit about that and then how that has, what that's shifted into now.
Well, just to start with, I've been around women for a long time. And as a woman and as a designer, I've been very sensitive to what women need and how we feel about our bodies, how we feel about our self-esteem, and the impact that has on our productivity, on reaching our potential. It's a big deal, and we all know we're intelligent, we're motivated, we're smart. I've owned my own business for 50 years. I've never had a partner. I'm a true entrepreneur, but there are times that we all either have a bad hair day, I know it sounds simplistic, or our pants are a little tight, or we're just feeling uncomfortable in our own skin, and we're not as good at getting the job done when you compare it to the day where you're feeling freaking fabulous, and you're like, I am feeling so good, my body, I can take my clothes off and feel good. There's no dress that's going to make me feel better. Well, you're invincible. You own the world. And so I understand how important that is to address. And we can be intellectual about everything, but that one thing can take us down. And pretending that it's not as important is not dealing with what the issues are. I kept thinking about that and thinking, why is this? Well, yes, we're all judged by the way we look. From the time we're babies, oh, she's so pretty, and that whole pretty thing is ruling us, has controlled us. will do anything. There are so many women who will do body changes, put stuff in their faces, do what strange things to kind of distort themselves in the search of beauty. And so the fashion industry has been a big objectifier of women, and the beauty industry produces cosmetics with chemicals that are making us sick. And we're buying into it. We're not stopping. We're a little bit more aware now, but there's a big issue there. But every time we have been objectified, and as an entrepreneur for this many years, and as a woman, I really sort of never dealt with the objectification in front of me. I kept it in this little secret spot. They'd all go back there. And I realized, as I spoke to other women, we were all taking those incidents of objectification, the humiliation, the embarrassment, and putting it back there. Well, tell me that's not eroding your self-esteem. Tell me that's not years of wearing down, making us feel like shit. And why? Because we're not talking about it. We're letting it own us. So I thought, AA works so well. Why can't we just start telling our stories? So I started to tell my stories at dinners with friends. And I would pull out something that I had ever talked about before, and I realized it just opened this flood of horrific stories. I mean, and every time a woman told her story, she looked so much more beautiful. She was just so, you just wanted to hug her, and everybody felt inspired by everybody else's stories. So I did events at J.P. Morgan where I had 600 women telling their stories for the first time in a group about workplace objectification. I've done different groups in different environments, smaller, intimate groups about sex and dating. I just had a breakfast not too long ago with 12 college students just graduating who, out of the 12, 4 had been raped on dates. And I sat there and I thought, this means there's a big number of rape dates that we are not talking about. We're not bringing out into the public. And fast forward to today, I'm so grateful that Me Too and Harvey Weinstein, you're a mess, but you really helped us so much. And we are grateful for your obnoxiousness to make us so angry, to get us to start screaming again. My concern, so I'm 72, 73. I've been through a few feminist movements. I've considered myself a fashion feminist. My role has always been to do whatever I can for women. And I've seen us scream. I've been out there screaming, hitting a wall. Scream again, hit a wall. We just keep doing it. And this time, I'm so obsessed with not letting us hit a wall again. We can't let that happen. So how do we move this forward? We have social media, we have the ability to communicate, and we have to do it with men. I am convinced of it. Now, I've spoken about this to some groups, and the younger girl especially want to come after me, and I say, I'm older than you, or you got to listen to me. I've been through this. Please give it a chance. Speak to men. We need to communicate with them. They're frightened. They're a mess. They don't know what to do with themselves. I had a radio show that I still am going to continue in a podcast, and I invited men to speak anonymously. A few of them did say there were a few bitches out there they had enough of, and I actually agreed with them because I know those bitches. We all know those bitches. And you know what? A lot of them have no interest in being feminists. So not all women are the same. This is something else for us to think about. There are a lot of women who watch The Bachelor, love it. Some of them are in my office. And I'm shocked. I can't believe it. How can you watch The Bachelor and feel that you're in this feminist time? And they look at me like I'm crazy. So the fact of the matter is we have to make room for other women and their beliefs. We don't have to change them. We can try to enlighten and share information. We don't have to change them. But we're dealing with women who are also impacting the way men feel. And their fears and their concerns are confused because some women are manipulative with men. Some women want Prince Harry to marry them and take care of them for the rest of their lives, and they don't believe in partnership, and they don't believe in being an entrepreneur, and they don't want that. And that's okay. However, they're impacting the way men are viewing women, no matter what we do. And that, to me, right now is the biggest challenge. So women speaking freely to men, I think, first of all, sitting down with men who care about you and telling them one of the most horrific experiences of objectification you've had, and I'm sure you can pick about 50, but pick one. Look them in the eye, whether it's your dad, your husband, your son, any man who cares about you. That's the way to get them to invest in how it feels. They don't need a handbook after that on how to behave. All they have to think of is, oh my God, my daughter went through that. I will never let a man do that to any woman again. So Stop Objectification was also meant to share your story with men. Then they understand the humiliation and the pain. It is horrible. It's terrible. So when they feel it, they're advocates. They're with us. So doing that as often as you can and sharing your stories with other women is also helpful. I'm not sure how far we can go with shaming, but I do know we can go very far with sharing our stories as often as possible. Then there's also the objectification, the biggest one, and the objectification where we objectify ourselves. This is a big deal, ladies. So did any of you watch Bridesmaids? It's not a typical movie I would watch, but Bridesmaids, John Hamm, Kristen Wiig. Okay, they're in bed. She's going to convince him to fall in love with her by objectifying herself. So I'm looking at the movie and I'm thinking, oh my God, I've done that. I can't believe I've done that. I'm looking at this and thinking how pathetic it is. Every meeting I had after that, I'd ask the women, have you ever done that? Did you see Bridesmaids? Have you ever objectified yourself? Unanimously, women have done that. So I think self-love and understanding that we draw the best to us. We draw the best men to us. We draw the best partners to us. We draw the best to us is self-love and taking care of ourselves, eating right, working out, sleeping, caring about us first so that you can then, and it's free, everything I just said costs nothing. It's free. When you do that, you're going to feel good about yourself. You'll be invincible all the time and work out all the stuff that we have to do at home.
Thank you, Norma. And it's a really good reminder. Go ahead, Cap. It's a difficult journey. It's not as easy as saying, okay, we need to shift the norms and shift the gender norms, which both tell boys how to act and how to be tough, and girls how to be, demure and sweet. That it is a journey that we're on. And so, Tiffany, what would be not that we can boil this down to, simple steps, but, in your book you talk a bit about, advice that you're giving people and how do we help. You're focusing on the home, but it also leads into the workplace. What are some things that you, from talking to people, are telling them, men and women, to do to make some of these changes?
It's so tough. First of all, one of my aha moments, or what I call Tiffany's epiphanies of 2017, were all of the men who would come up to me and say, I need to drop the ball. which reminded me that we're all swimming in the same ocean in terms of our society. I think that it's tough because we all, the most important thing that I've ever done was start to say yes to pretty much every woman that reaches out to me. Like if you reach out to me on Facebook or Twitter, I will sit down with you. And I meet with women on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9, 10, and 11. And I've been doing this for almost 5 years. I've met with over 1,000 women. And the reason why it's been one of the most important things I've ever done is because if you're someone who is raising money for women, who's speaking to women, who's researching women, who's writing about women, talking to women, it's a completely different experience when you actually sit down one-on-one with a woman and talk to her about what her challenges and opportunities are. And what's become very clear to me is that we're all born into various roles. If you're born a boy, your first role was probably son. If you're a girl, your first role was probably daughter. You might become a brother or sister. Certainly we become friends, students, workers, maybe husbands, wives, mothers, fathers. All of us are fairly ambitious, which means that we by default put the word good in front of all of those roles. So it's not sufficient to be a daughter. You strive to be a good daughter and a good student, a good worker, a good citizen. And what I find fascinating about having so many conversations with people one-on-one is that even though we're born in different parts of the world, to different families, different communities, different values, somehow we all ended up with very similar job descriptions for what it means to be a good anything. I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and in my good sister job description, it says that I need to respond to my little sister's text messages within like 2 minutes. There's probably a couple right there saying that I need to give them $100 or something, right? And anyone who's an older sibling, particularly if you're a girl who's an older sibling, knows that feeling of needing to be responsible. In the job description for good mom, there is literally a line that says you need to be physically present when your child takes their first steps. I cannot tell you the number of women who come into my booth at 9 or 10. They're totally stressed. They have a work event they have to go to. They know as soon as they get on the plane or the train, their child, who is about a year old, is going to start walking. They will have missed the entire event. It will have meant that they're a very bad mother. This is despite the fact that no one can tell me they remember who was there when they took their first steps. But somehow, this is like a really important event that makes such a big difference in the life of a child. And by the way, one of the most insidious lines in a job description for good husband and good father is that you must aspire to be a breadwinner at all costs. Even the cost of meaningfully engaging with your family. And I hope somebody writes a book about how men can drop that ball. So the reason why it's so challenging is because the first thing that you have to do is realize, which is very difficult if you're ambitious and you think you're in the driver's seat of your own life, that you're actually not in the driver's seat of your own life. Most of your fears and most of your expectations about who you should be every single day is based off of that job description that you were handed by the people who you model yourself after, by popular culture, by the next billboard who says you're supposed to be skinnier and have longer hair or whatever you're supposed to be. And that really, until you've taken yourself through an intentional process, which is what I encourage people to do, of figuring out what really matters most to you, separate and apart from the rest of the world, and what your highest and best use is in achieving that, and how you meaningfully engage other people in your house and in your world at work to help you fulfill that, then you're just living somebody else's story. So I wrote Drop the Ball as a memoir. It's not a how-to book because women are stubborn and they wouldn't believe me if I told them. But because it really is about that journey, and I encourage everyone to go on that journey. And the first step is figuring out what the job descriptions are that you're probably basing your success and your worth and your value off of, and rewriting them entirely.
So, Michael, I'm wondering, does that come up when you're having these conversations in these many, many workplaces? Because there, people, they have a real job description for their actual job that they hold in that place. So how does what you talk to them about shift, or does it, what they're doing in the space they're holding in their companies?
It's a really interesting question, and I think that, listening to you just now, Tiffany, I mean, many of the men tell me the same kind of stories that the women tell you. I do want to, so I have two things that I want to say. The first is, I think that this is what I hear from men consistently now, is, and research that Promundo just did on men and parental leave, found that most men want it, and most men actually would sacrifice some career goals in order to be able to take parental leave, which is really, so it's not about motivation. It's about what obstacles are put in the way of men to do what they want to do. So listening to men's stories here is going to be important. And of course, one of the major obstacles, of course, are the stereotypes about men. So that if you say that you want to do this, if you want to take parental leave, you're somehow saying, I'm not a serious worker. I'm not committed to my career. So, and so some years ago, in fact, I had this argument with the Harvard Business Review, like 20 years ago. And they, at the time, very few companies even offered parental leave to men. And at those companies that even did offer it, men didn't take it. So their position was, men don't want it. Companies are saying, why should we offer a benefit that nobody wants? And I said, I think there's another story there. So I went to companies that actually did offer parental leave to men. And I asked men whose wives had recently had babies if they took parental leave. And guys told me stories like this. They said, well, I was going to, but I was talking to my male colleagues, and they said, oh yeah, you're going to take parental leave, huh? I guess you're not committed to your career. Or I went to my supervisor. My supervisor said, yes, we'll put you on the daddy track. I mean, you'll never make partner or anything, but you could definitely do it. Of course, he didn't. One guy told me, New Yorkers, you're going to love this story. Those of you who are from New York, this guy worked at a very, very large corporate law firm in Midtown, about 450 lawyers, went to the senior managing partner and said, my wife's about to have a baby. I'm so thrilled that we have paid parental leave for men, and so I'm going to take it. And the managing partner kind of leaned over his desk in that kind of officious way and said, now you listen here. I am 64 years old, and I have 3 grown children, and I cannot, sitting here today, tell you their birthdays. You're going to have to make some sacrifices. He tells me this story saying, this was the moment I realized I was leaving the firm. And so think for a moment about this, because think about what these companies are losing when they lose these people. Right? He went with a few refugees from large corporate firms. They founded a small boutique firm. They're doing great. They all have pictures of their kids on their desk. They all remember their kids' birthdays. So my feeling is this is no longer, for men, this is no longer about motivation. The question now is, what are the obstacles that men have to overcome in order to get the very benefits they say they want to have? And so that's my first point. The second is I want to take what Norma said and also, and at the same time, turn it on its head. She says that when she presents to these young women, they push back, and because she's saying, we have to engage men, and they're pushing back. I feel that we also have to listen, we older men need to listen to younger men. Because I think especially in this Me Too moment, what makes me so hopeful about it is the attitudes of younger men. There was a survey in The Economist, some of you may have seen it, in November, and they asked 2 cohorts of men, one 18 to 30 and one over 65. And they asked them about workplace behavior, low-level workplace behavior, not doing a Trump, but work low-level things like, is it okay to call a woman sweetheart or honey? Is it okay to come up behind her and give her a neck massage? Is it okay to say, you look beautiful? 80% of the 18 to 30-year-olds said no, and 75% of the 65 and over said yes. I think what we need in companies right now is some reverse mentoring. I think we old guys have to start listening to the younger guys. They are far more comfortable with cross-sex friendships, far more comfortable with gender-equal workplaces. I think what we need to start designing is a reverse mentor program so that we, older mentors, can start learning from these younger guys who take greater gender equality for granted in their day-to-day relationships. And here's the one thing I would sort of point out to you. For those of you who have children, take a look at the gender of their friends. Young people, this is the biggest change in young people's lives, is cross-sex friendships. 25 years ago when I started teaching, I would ask, how many of you have a good friend of the opposite sex? I'd get like 10, 15% hands. I can walk into any college or university in the country today and say, is there anyone here who doesn't have a good friend of the opposite sex? I never see a hand anymore. So think about the politics of friendship, right? The politics of friendship is who you make friends with. You make, what's the word we use? Your peers, your equals. Young people have greater experience with day-to-day interpersonal gender equality than any generation that has ever walked on the face of the earth. This cannot help but be good. So I think that we also can be learning a lot from younger people about what they need, and we could be responding to that, because young men coming into the workplace, their profiles look very similar to women's. They want to have great careers, they want to have great careers, they want to be awesome parents. We have to let them.
Go ahead, Norma. You look like you want to say something.
This is a really important topic and something that I've been thinking about and talking about. I think any man over 25 is sort of feeling that any woman could possibly call him out for an action, I'm talking about you guys in the audience too, that you did, either with intention or not, probably with not, because most men don't intentionally want to create pain for women. But your fear is that your intention was never to hurt a woman or to make her feel bad or embarrass her or humiliate her, but you might have. The behavior of men, and so think about this, ladies. I was dating in the 60s, actually the late 50s. I was an early dater. And that was Mad Men time. And there was behavior that was extraordinary. I have stories. Then the 70s, then the 80s, then the 90s, and women were raising these boys that are now men sitting in this room, and the men we love, men all around us, who can feel a little guilty that they might have, or they could get shamed for almost something that had no intention of being painful for a woman. Now, women were raising these boys. We were accepting the norm of how it was okay for a boy to behave a certain way, and girls could just sort of smile and be complimented by a little pat on the butt or being treated sort of disrespectfully. But we didn't think of it as disrespectful. They liked us maybe. So this continued and continued. Now women are more enlightened. So a lot of the young men that are so fabulous now are fabulous because their mothers are enlightened. So it's really up to mothers and the maternal instinct of how boys should behave that really matters. I have a friend who's quite successful. She's a very important person at the UN. She has a son. She and her husband were at a play date with a whole bunch of kids playing volleyball, and a little girl was doing, soccer. And the little girl was doing so well. She owned the ball, and the ball came by her, and she said, "Little girl, you're doing great. You get those boys. You win this game." And her husband said, "Sweetie, come here. Do you see your son over there? He's in this game. Did you forget that it's your son?" And she was so horrified that she did that with the intention of supporting the girl and realizing that she forgot about her son. And it was startling to her, and it's a story I can't forget because it keeps saying mothers really have the most influence over their sons, and let's use that influence in the best way now. And hopefully we see the results already.
Thank you. So I want to say one thing in response to something that came up earlier, which is, Norma, you were saying, you've seen this happen, these conversations and, kind of waves of it, and those of us in the kind of women's funding world have seen the waves too, and there's a worry that this will go away. And I feel very strongly that it will not this time. And I think I speak for a lot of people in the room. For one thing, there are so many women now in leadership positions who are speaking up, so beyond the Me Too and the Time's Up, but leading organizations and raising money to actually invest in programs to educate people and to make these changes and to shift policies. And this is part of what we were talking about earlier today, and to fund the work. New York Women's Foundation has just started a fund to get behind Me Too. And so it is all about the voice, yes, and money behind it. And this has been, I think, something that is very different and new over these last decades. So I think we feel very hopeful. And as we're hearing from our panelists, there is a lot more to do. But just looking around in this room and seeing who's here and who's willing to have this conversation feels very, very inspiring. So I want to thank each of you for being here. I'm getting the note that our time is up. But thank you so much, each of you.